My wife hit the jackpot. Literally, $9 million. Then she blindsided me with divorce papers and told me to get out. What she didn't count on was the prenup. Ironically, the same one her parents had insisted I sign before we tied a knot. I'm 35 now, and I come from a pretty modest upbringing. My parents still live in a quiet neighborhood where I grew up, in a simple 3-bedroom house that always smelled like clean laundry and something good simmering on the stove. Right after high school, I bounced around from job to job, bartending, doing shifts in my uncle's hardware store, eventually landing a steady gig managing a local sporting goods shop. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest and kept me grounded. My wife's world, though, was a completely different universe from mine. Her family had money, real money. They owned several properties, drove luxury cars, and threw these extravagant parties that felt more like corporate galas than family gatherings. I'll refer to her parents as FIL and MIL for simplicity. Her dad was this tall, commanding guy. He didn't even have to raise his voice to control a room. There was always this undercurrent of menace in his friendly comments, like he could crush you with a smile. Her mom had that same kind of presence, only subtler. A single glance from her could make you second-guess your entire outfit or life choices. They never came right out and said anything cruel to me, but I always sensed the judgment simmering under their polished surface. Once my wife and I got engaged, it became painfully clear how much her parents distrusted anyone outside their wealthy bubble. Even though we'd been together for years, they still looked at me like I was a threat to the family fortune. Before we even had a chance to pick a wedding date, her father dropped the hammer. He wanted me to sign a prenuptial agreement. I didn't have the money to hire a lawyer to fight it, and honestly, I was so in love that I convinced myself it was just a formality to ease their worries. I told myself love would be enough to get us through anything. I'll never forget the day I signed. It was warm out. We were at her parents' enormous estate. Her father set the document in front of me, then slid a pen across the table like it was just another piece of paperwork. Her mother handed me a cup of coffee, making the whole thing feel eerily like a business deal. My wife stood off to the side, not saying much. That silence hurt more than I expected, but I brushed it off, telling myself it wouldn't mean anything once we were married. The prenup was clear. Anything her family gave her, gifts, inheritances, trusts, stayed solely hers. But anything we got together during our marriage, like a house or lottery winnings, would be shared equally. That part struck me as strange, but I didn't dwell on it. I just wanted to be with her. 6 months later, we had a stunning lakeside wedding. My parents were blown away by the extravagance, but happy for me. I remember the tight smile on my dad's face when he met my in-laws. He'd always told me to trust my gut, but I was too caught up in the idea that love could fix everything. The first few years were fairly smooth. We lived in a condo her parents helped us get. I took on the monthly mortgage payments, though the initial down payment had come from them, labeled as a gift. In hindsight, it felt more like a leash than generosity. At the time, though, I just assumed this was how wealthy families operated. Like any couple, we had our share of arguments, especially when it came to money or how involved our parents were in our lives. Her folks had a habit of dropping by unannounced, sometimes even bringing new furniture or rearranging our space without asking. When I pushed back, my wife always dismissed it as them being helpful. Then everything changed with one phone call. She rang me up, breathless, telling me she'd won $9 million on a whim, a lottery ticket she bought at a gas station. At first, I was thrilled. I imagined us quitting our jobs, traveling, living out all the dreams we talked about, but that excitement didn't last. She immediately insisted we tell no one, not even my parents. Then came the secrecy. She started meeting with lawyers I'd never heard of, saying things like, "You wouldn't be comfortable there." That stung more than I let on. What I didn't realize was that the real betrayal hadn't even begun. One afternoon, I walked through the door after work, bone-tired, and found her with her aunt, rifling through our things. That's when she dropped the news. Cool as ice, she was divorcing me. She told me to pack up and get out of the condo, because technically, the place was in her name. I was stunned. Sure, I'd been paying into the mortgage every month, but she seemed to think that since her dad covered the down payment, and now she had a fortune, I no longer had any place in her life. My chest felt like it cracked open. I called my dad, barely holding it together, and told him I'd just been kicked out of my own home. It felt like betrayal on a scale I couldn't even wrap my head around, but what came next shook me even more. Her father sent his personal lawyer to make sure everything was handled in her favor, to shut me out completely and protect the winnings. But they made one crucial mistake. They forgot about the prenup. The very contract they forced on me said that any major financial gain during the marriage, including lottery winnings, was joint property. So if they rushed the divorce thinking they could keep the money out of reach, they were dead wrong. I knew that I had to play this carefully. My dad told me to stay calm, hire an attorney outside their wealthy circle, and prepare for an ugly legal battle. And I wasn't about to roll over. They thought I was just some pushover they could discard, but they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. I spent a few nights at my parents' place, still trying to wrap my head around everything. My mom was furious, pacing the kitchen, fuming about how my in-laws had disrespected me from the very beginning. My dad was just as angry, but he kept his head always practical, always focused. He made a few calls and got me in to see an old buddy of his, a family law attorney. First thing the next morning, I was sitting in that guy's office, feeling a mix of rage and cautious relief. I told him everything, how my in-laws demanded a prenup, how my wife hit the lottery for $9 million, and how she kicked me out right after. The attorney looked over the prenup, and then he chuckled. Actually chuckled. They screwed themselves, he said. Turns out, the very document they thought would protect them included specific language that classified lottery winnings as marital property. Unless some judge took a wildly creative interpretation, I had every right to a significant share. Hearing that was like someone throwing me a rope while I was drowning. I'd been so sure the prenup would shut me out, but in their rush to protect family wealth, they never imagined a lottery win would be the wild card. My lawyer warned me it wasn't going to be easy. My in-laws had deep pockets, powerful friends, and would probably unleash a whole legal team just to bury me. But he was confident we had a solid case, especially considering my financial contributions and how suddenly I was kicked out of the home we both lived in. I asked him how long this could drag on. In our state, a contested divorce could take months, maybe longer, but he figured once her side realized their legal footing was shaky, they might rush to settle. He said they'd probably try to intimidate me into settling for pennies. And sure enough, it didn't take long. Within a few days, my father-in-law left me a voicemail dripping with menace, warning me to back off. He claimed I wasn't entitled to a dime and promised I'd walk away with nothing if I dared go after the winnings. My lawyer told me to keep every message. Then one evening, my mother-in-law showed up outside my parents' house and cornered me by the car. She offered me a generous deal if I just walk away quietly. Her idea of generous was laughable. It wouldn't have even covered half of what I'd already put into our mortgage. I told her no. We'd let a judge sort it out. She looked stunned, like no one had ever said no to her before. When that didn't work, my lawyer filed motions to freeze the lottery funds so they couldn't shift the money out of reach. That lit a fire under them. Suddenly they were spinning this story about how I was some scheming gold digger who used their daughter to climb the social ladder. It stung, but I stayed steady. My boss, who owned the sporting goods shop, stood by me, even when my father-in-law tried to pressure him into firing me. He just laughed and told the guy to buzz off. Some friends took sides. A few called me bitter. Others said I was brave for standing up to them. The whole thing felt like walking through a minefield, but I wasn't going to fold. After a few dead-end negotiations, we finally got a court date. My wife never spoke to me directly. She kept herself tucked away behind her parents' wall of lawyers, refusing to answer any of my messages. Her legal team did all the talking. They painted me as a freeloading husband who brought nothing to the table. But my lawyer came prepared. He brought financial records, receipts, proof of shared bills, even highlighted that part of the prenup about financial windfalls. He also reminded the judge that I'd been thrown out of our shared home with no warning. That caught the court's attention. The judge didn't say much, but he ordered both sides to prepare for a formal hearing on how the assets would be divided. Just when I thought the intimidation was done, my father-in-law took one last shot. He threatened my boss again. Same threats, same arrogance, and again my boss shut him down cold. My lawyer told me to stay sharp, to expect more dirty tricks, but he believed the judge would see right through it all. Still, nothing could fully prepare me for that final courtroom battle. As the hearing drew closer, the pressure ratcheted up. My wife stayed silent, but her lawyers were relentless. They kept filing motion after motion, all arguing that since she'd bought the ticket herself, the winnings were hers alone. They conveniently ignored the wording in the prenup that clearly stated any major windfall during marriage, lottery, game shows, whatever, was joint property unless otherwise specified. In that clause, there was no otherwise specified. While all this played out, my father-in-law kept poisoning the well. He called up mutual friends, local contacts, anyone who'd listen, pushing the idea that I'd married for money, that I was a leech who latched onto his poor, naive daughter. It was maddening, but I wasn't going to be bullied out of what was legally mine. I pulled every receipt, every utility bill, every shared expense I'd paid over the years, my lawyer, and I combed through every line of that prenup. Then he pointed to a line we hadn't emphasized before. It said, word for word, that all financial windfalls, including but not limited to lottery or game show winnings, shall be considered marital assets unless otherwise specified in writing. That sentence was the nail in their argument's coffin. They hadn't specified anything in writing. They'd left the door wide open. A week before the main hearing, we had a preliminary status conference. I showed up in a basic suit. My wife came in flanked by her parents and 4 lawyers, plus some financial advisor I didn't recognize. The arrogance on their faces was thick enough to choke on. But their expressions slipped when my lawyer calmly handed the judge the prenup, already bookmarked to the lottery clause. The judge read it, said nothing for a long moment, then declared that all major assets, including the winnings, would remain frozen until the full hearing. That was the first real crack in their armor. That same afternoon, I ran into my mother-in-law outside the courthouse. She pulled me aside, trying to act civil. "Let's talk like adults," she said. Then she offered me a lump sum, smaller than her first insult of an offer. She dressed it up as a mercy payment for someone from my background. I smiled, told her no thanks, and said we'd let the judge decide. That's when she snapped. She accused me of tearing their family apart, as if I was the one who filed for divorce the second a windfall came through the door. The hypocrisy made me want to scream, but I kept my voice steady, told her I wasn't going anywhere, and this time I meant it. My lawyer had warned me early on. No matter what happened, I couldn't let myself get drawn into heated arguments, especially the kind that could be spun against me in court later. Still, behind the calm I tried to maintain, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that my in-laws might try something shady, like tucking away lottery funds into hidden accounts. Thankfully, my attorney had seen this coming. He filed for court orders to block any large transfers, just in case they decided to get sneaky with the winnings. On top of that, we had a forensic accountant on standby, ready to dive in the second we spotted anything suspicious with the money trail. It didn't take long for my father-in-law to lose his temper. He left me a scathing voicemail, ranting that I was a parasite who'd sucked the love out of his daughter's life, which was pretty ironic, considering they were the ones who tossed me out the door the moment the jackpot hit. As the hearing drew near, I spent hours preparing with my lawyer. We went over my statement word for word, practicing how to stay composed, how to keep the facts front and center. I gathered every shred of proof I had, our prenup, mortgage payment receipts, even old texts from my wife confirming our shared expenses. My lawyer told me to let the documents do most of the talking, to stay calm and not rise to any emotional bait. That morning, standing outside the courthouse, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My parents came with me for support, but waited outside once the session started. When I stepped into the courtroom, I spotted my wife seated stiffly next to her father. Both wore that same cold, blank expression, like this was just another business meeting. Her mom hovered a few rows back, arms folded tight across her chest. Their legal team looked straight out of a corporate brochure. Tailored suits, polished smiles, all projecting confidence. Maybe they thought money and manpower would outweigh the truth. The judge didn't waste a second. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, and you could tell from her tone she wasn't there for drama. My wife's attorney went first, painting me as nothing more than a hanger-on, someone who contributed little and happened to be in the right place when lightning struck. They argued that the lottery ticket had been bought with her own money, making the winnings hers alone. But my lawyer stayed cool. He laid out the clause in the prenup word for word, the one that clearly included windfalls like lottery prizes as marital property. Then he dropped the bomb, bank records showing the ticket was purchased using her joint account card. That visibly rattled their side. You could feel the tension ripple through their table as they scrambled for a response. They claimed it was a mistake, that she'd accidentally used the wrong card, or that the funds had come from her father. But our statements showed both our names on the account. No ambiguity. The judge took note, her expression unreadable, but her attention laser-focused on their stumbling explanations. Eventually, my wife broke her silence. Her voice was quieter than I expected. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me, that her parents had pressured her into filing once the money came in. She tried to justify it, saying they were afraid people would come after us once the news got out. My lawyer asked if she'd ever brought any of this up with me before taking action. She hesitated, then admitted she hadn't. You could feel the mood shift. The judge's expression hardened, and the room went still. By the time we reached midday, it was becoming painfully clear. The prenup they had weaponized to protect their wealth was now threatening to blow up in their faces. The judge scheduled a second hearing to make final rulings, but said outright that she was leaning toward treating the lottery as a major marital asset, one that needed to be divided fairly. On our way out, my father-in-law brushed past me, muttering, "This isn't over." But his usual swagger was gone. The cracks were starting to show. In the weeks that followed, their desperation grew more obvious. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to reinterpret the prenup, insisting the language wasn't meant to include lottery proceeds. But the judge wasn't buying it. She denied every request, saying the wording spoke for itself. My mother-in-law ambushed me again outside a hearing, this time with a warning. She said I'd regret it if I destroyed their family. I didn't hold back. I told her flat out, they were the ones who blindsided me and threw me out like I never mattered. Then came the voicemails from my wife. They were emotional, apologetic, pleading. She said she didn't want things to end in bitterness, that maybe if we could just reach some private agreement, we could avoid more damage and salvage what was left. A part of me almost wanted to believe her, but every time I thought back to how it all started, how they turned on me the moment the money came in, I knew better if they'd treated me with fairness from the start. Maybe we could have worked something out, but now? It was too late for that. After everything, the threats, the deceit, the way they threw me out like I was nothing, there wasn't a trace of trust left in me. My lawyer made it clear. No backdoor negotiations, no second chances. We had the stronger case, so why settle for scraps? Then came the day of the final hearing. The courtroom buzzed with tension, packed wall to wall with attorneys and observers. My parents were there, sitting quietly in the back row, joined by a few close friends who had stood by me through the mess. The judge entered with that same composed, stern energy. She reviewed the latest motions, then gave the floor for final arguments. My father-in-law's lead attorney took one last desperate swing, trying to paint me as some manipulative opportunist who'd only noticed a loophole in the prenup after reaping the benefits of their so-called generosity. But my lawyer responded with cool clarity, laying out the facts like puzzle pieces clicking into place. First, they had pressured me into signing the prenup. Second, it clearly listed lottery winnings and windfalls as marital property. And third, while her father had pitched in for her condo, I'd been paying into it every month, making it far from a purely separate asset. And then there was the divorce filing, dropped just days after she won. If that wasn't a calculated move to cut me out, what was? The judge didn't interrupt. She listened, patient but alert, her expression unreadable. Then she gave her ruling. She stated plainly that the lottery winnings fell under the umbrella of marital property based on the language of the prenup, language they had written. She criticized my in-laws for trying to twist the very contract they once demanded I sign. She also ruled that my sudden eviction had been unjustified and that I was owed compensation for my share of the condo and other marital expenses I'd helped cover. And then, just like that, it was over. The judge issued her order. I was to receive a sizable portion of the lottery money, along with reimbursement tied to the condo. The official paperwork will be finalized in the coming weeks, but the verdict was sealed. My father-in-law looked like he was about to explode. His face was flushed with rage, and my mother-in-law leaned in, whispering sharply at him, clearly furious. My wife just stood there with tears streaming down her cheeks, whether out of genuine regret or just the sting of watching so much money slip through her fingers, I'll never know. A strange cocktail of emotions hit me in that moment. Relief, vindication, even sorrow. We had once loved each other, but greed and control, fueled by our parents, had ripped it all apart. In the days that followed, their team tried floating a new settlement offer, slightly reduced. They said, less drama, less time, but my lawyer advised we hold firm. The judge had spoken. We had no reason to accept less. The only compromise I made was giving up my claim to the condo. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything that held the memory of being forced out. Eventually, the check came in. It wasn't quite half the winnings, but it was more than enough to give me a fresh start. Enough to help my parents renovate their home, something I'd always wanted to do for them. Enough to invest wisely, rebuild with intention. Through it all, one thing became crystal clear. My in-laws had operated under the assumption that money shielded them from consequences, that they could buy silence, rewrite truth, and push people around. But what they didn't expect, what they never counted on, was that I would fight back and win. The prenup they used to protect themselves became the very weapon that ensured I wasn't left broken and broke. Poetic justice, if ever there was. As far as I know, my wife still lives under their roof, both literally and emotionally. The scandal has cost her a lot of standing in her social circle. Some friends have said she's struggling, weighed down by guilt, but whether she ever admits what really happened, I'm not holding my breath. I took what I learned about trust, about resilience, about the price of silence, and turned it into something better, something real. I've stepped away from that world completely now. No more manipulation, no more pretending, just a quieter, simpler life, one I'm building on my terms. And I'm not the same man I was before all this began. I'm tougher, wiser, no longer the naive guy they thought they could bulldoze. If they remember me at all, I hope it's for this. I didn't roll over, I didn't beg. I used the very tool they handed me to make sure they couldn't erase me from the picture. They started this war. I ended it. And that was the close of the chapter.